Going on, guys? All right, we are here to talk Week 5 XFL. We did miss last week, but we are back, so stay tuned.
Fantasy football, you dealing with the best. Keep it hype, authentic, this ain't nothing like the rest. With the Armchair Fantasy Show podcast, give advice for all the listeners to improve your stats. Yeah, we live on goingfor2.com. Tuesdays and Fridays, this is what you want. Talking dynasties and daily drafts, and we just getting started, that ain't even the half. Yeah, so go ahead, tell your friends to join. Going for two, cause no one remembers the extra point. Hey, goingfor2.com, the Armchair Fantasy Show.
What is going on, guys? All right, welcome to episode 135 of the Armchair Fantasy Show. I'm your host, of course, Jeff Lambert. You can follow me on Twitter at JeffLambert77. We're live every Tuesday and Friday. Tonight is a special night for Thursday. We're also, of course, we're on Periscope, Facebook Live, and YouTube streaming. And you go all your I'm screwing this whole intro up, man. I'm killing it right now. We are also streaming in all your major podcast networks and on the Going for Two app for iOS and Android. Tim, I hope you're not as tongue-tied as I am, man. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing pretty good, man. Obviously, hated not having a show last week, but I'm glad we're back for another week of XFL, man. Hope we out there make some money.
Definitely. So, how did your week go last week? How did you do?
It was pretty good. I was pretty heavy on Trey McBride, which I think was kind of who stood out. He helped kind of, cash me. I don't think I made a ton of money. I probably made like 3 times what I bought in, but I'll always take a profit, right?
Yep, definitely. Yeah, after Saturday's game, I'm sitting. So I played in 2 tournaments. I maxed out the $1.20 max, and I maxed out the quarter, the 25-cent 20 max. After Saturday, I was sitting in first place in both of those tournaments. And then Sunday happened, and I just watched my lineup because I was really heavy on defenders. I had some Rashard Watson there, thinking he would have a bounce back. I had Tompkins in there, hoping he'd have a bounce back. They were all terrible, so my lineup just slowly went back to the left. I still ended up cashing about 2 times, but man, that payday would have been much nicer had the defenders shown up.
Yeah, man, I know what you mean, because me and like a lot of people, I went pretty heavy on Houston. I just went heavy on the wrong guys. I had Mobley, I had Cam Phillips, but obviously you needed Nick Hawley to win any money last week, so that didn't really work out for me. I think my best call of the week, though, because so many people were heavy on Landry Jones, is that I went with Jordan Ta'amu, and he ended up paying off for me last week. That allowed me to get Trey McBride and everybody in there. But like I said, Cam Phillips kind of kept me from having a big day. I can't believe I'm saying this after the week he had 2 weeks ago.
I know, right?
The win last week was to fade Cam Phillips.
Yep.
So hopefully, anybody out there, if you faded him, hopefully you made some money.
Yep, definitely. Yeah, because I had a ton of Cam Phillips myself. And, like I said, with Rashad Ross and Tompkins in there, it was a tough Sunday, man, to watch me go from, from hundreds of dollars down to I literally think I made like $50 after all said and done. I was like, damn, that's just not good. All right, man. Well, let's go ahead and just jump right into the slate here, and we will start off with the quarterbacks. So let's go ahead and hit the drop.
Let's talk quarterbacks.
All right, man. Give me some of your top quarterbacks this week.
Yeah, so this week I think is especially tough because DraftKings, every week that goes on, they get even tighter with the pricing. There's really only one game that I think has a high over-under this week, and I think it's the Houston and Seattle game. So it's hard not to go with P.J. Walker right there at the top.
Yep.
But, he's $12,000 at this point. I think you almost have to find a way to pay for him because he's got the highest upside on the slate. But it definitely is tough to put a lineup together with him that you feel any kind of good about. So there's a couple guys we'll talk about later that I think you could. But we've got some news coming out with a couple different teams this week. So I actually think I have 4 quarterbacks that are in play. You're not going to play Walker. I think you can go back to Jordan Ta'amu. I think that part of that is that the DC defenders are giving up a ton of yards on the ground. And one of the best parts of his game is his ability to run the ball.
Yep.
So I don't know how much they're going to be able to pass the ball because the DC actually, is pretty good against the pass. But as we saw Tampa Bay do last week, they just said, okay, well, we'll run it 30 times.
Yep.
Right? So when we get to running backs, we'll talk about the situation there in St. Louis, but I think he could still be a play, even, hopefully he can get those yards on the ground. But the other two guys I think I'm even more interested in are both guys that last week were backups. One is going to be Taylor Cornelius, who won the job in Tampa Bay. He's already, Mark Trestman came out and said, okay, he's going to be our starter. He looked really good against Houston. He looked even better against, DC. And so now he's got to go on the road though, after 2 straight home games and play against LA. So he's 8,500. He'll save you a little bit over Jordan. And then, the last guy on my list who I expect to be very popular this week is going to be Philip Nelson. So he didn't do a lot in week 1. But I think part of that was it was just week 1,
yeah.
right? He threw the ball 42 times, but I don't think he had a good, idea of this offense. And last week after Landry Jones got hurt, he came in and, he didn't move the ball well, but it didn't look like he was the deer in the headlights that I saw in week 1.
Right.
So I think he's going to be popular just because he's only 7,500. He'll allow you to pay up for some of the other guys we're going to talk about. But I think those are really, the only 4 guys I really have in play. So I got to admit, though, it's a little bit of a leap on Philip Nelson just because he did look so bad.
Yeah.
But that one I'm just kind of banking on because New York, they give up the most yards per game, both passing and total yards per game.
Yeah.
So I'm just really hoping that with a home game, he's going to be able to roll on that offense and hopefully put up some points.
Yeah, and really, I'm looking at his week 1 stats, and other than not throwing a touchdown, I mean, he had a 78.6% completion percentage, so he was completing the passes. He just couldn't get the ball in the end zone. Of course, didn't throw for a ton of yards, so a lot of dink and dunk, but I do think he is viable because of his price point. I think you can fit some of the higher price guys because there is some value on the slate that we're still waiting to hear from, so hopefully that value does come through so you can pay up for some of these guys. But if that value does not come through, you may have to pay down to get Nelson to get some of those bigger plays in there. And I'm pretty much on the same guys that you are. I think Tamu is, again, my favorite play just because his price is like the perfect price where he's not too expensive, but he's not super cheap either. He's, that guy that can get you the 20-plus upside there and, get you those Walker-type numbers, but still a much bigger discount from over P.J. Walker to down to Tamu. So, yeah, and his legs obviously give him a nice, safe floor. So, Tamu is definitely my favorite quarterback this week. All right, let's go ahead and move into the running backs.
It's time for running backs. Running backs.
All right, so we got some interesting things going on here at running back, man. You talk about a couple of these guys that are questionable that may not play and who benefits.
Yeah, so let's just start right there at the top. I think that with Philip Nelson stepping in for Landry Jones, I think Dallas is going to try and run the ball. So I expect the chalky running back this week to be Cameron Artis-Payne and Lance Dunbar. If I had to give an edge, I'd give it to Cameron Artis-Payne, and part of that's just because there's only really $600 difference, and I feel like Cameron Artis-Payne has gotten more involved in the passing game week after week, right? Yeah. Week 1, 4 targets. Week 2, 5 targets. Week 3, 6 targets. Week 4, 8 targets, right? So he's, catching up to Lance Dunbar in terms of the work in the passing game. He's being more efficient on the ground. And now there's only a $600 difference. You're not saving $3,000 like you were a couple weeks ago, yep. Right? So I fully expect Cameron Artis-Payne is probably going to be the chalk at running back. Obviously, in XFL, you only have to play one running back, so there's probably going to be a lot of people that will only play Cameron Artis-Payne. Okay? So that being said, I think the next best play is De'Veon Smith. But as of right now, he's been limited in practice this week. He was held on Wednesday. He practiced today in a limited fashion. But if De'Veon Smith doesn't play, then I think Jacques Patrick becomes the best play on the slate.
Yep.
He's 7,000, and they like him enough that last week they gave him 21 touches, right? So, if you're looking for a way, like I said, it's only, 600 less than Dunbar and 1,200 less than Cameron Artis-Payne. But if De'Veon Smith doesn't play, he's going to be the feature back. Yep. I expect him to get the bulk of the work on the ground and in the air. And, LA will give up some yards on the ground. I think they're actually last in the league in terms of yards given up, 131 yards per game. So I think that he's somebody you got to keep an eye on. If De'Veon Smith does play, I'm not nearly as interested in him. I think they're going to be in a true timeshare, and you're just hoping which guy gets the touchdown. So that's kind of my initial take on that. The next one, as we just pointed out, Tampa Bay last week proved that the way you beat DC is to run the ball.
Yep.
That's one of the reasons I like Jordan Ta'amu this week is his running ability. But Matt Jones and Kristen Michael are both questionable for this game. Now, I know Matt Jones has been questionable for about every game thus far, and he's played in all of them and gotten a ton of touches. But it's, again, a situation that you want to closely monitor. If they're out, then I'm definitely going to be looking more at somebody like Keith Ford, who may end up emerging as a value on this slate.
Yep. Yeah, and going back to that Tampa Bay game with Davion Smith and Patrick, I was looking at the running backs on the roster. There's not a single running back other than those two guys that have touched the ball all season. So I think if Smith is out, I think it's Patrick's show, and I think he gets all the touches. So I think he would definitely be a great value there at 7,000. So I definitely love him. Another guy that you didn't talk about that I like too is James Butler from Houston, and it's a lot to do with the fact that he's in a high-powered offense. And as we've seen last week, anybody at any time can go off. Last week it was Nick Holley, it was Cam Phillips for a few times. I think Butler's been pretty good as well. He's been getting a lot of work. You know, they get in close, they could possibly hand the ball off to him and get him a touchdown. So James Butler's getting enough usage for me in a high-powered offense that I definitely want to have him in some of my lineups as well. And then the back to own in DC right now is not who we thought it was in the beginning of the season. I think Mr. Donnell Pumphrey is kind of taken over that top spot there. And I think he's doing well enough that I think that he is viable, especially like you mentioned, they're going to be at home. They played much better at home the first two games than they have these last two games on the road. Right. But he's getting some pretty decent usage as well, especially in the passing game. He's got at least 3 targets every game this year. He did have 7 carries last week for 34 yards, but I think they're starting to like him a little bit more. If you watched the game last week before it became a blowout, I think Pumphrey was getting a lot of the work, and then, of course, they started getting blown out, and then it was just throw the ball over the field and a bunch of 3-and-outs, which really kind of hurt them. So he's definitely on my list as well. And my favorite play, it's still, he's been a play since week 1 for me, and they just haven't raised his price enough, I don't think, yet, and that's Darius Victor. Still down at 5.8. I still think he's viable. He had 18 carries last week, so I think that's definitely going to put you on the map when you get that many carries as a running back. So he's another guy that's on my list as well.
Yeah, just one note on Butler is that as of the last time I looked, Houston was favored by like 13 points. So whenever you get a home team projected by that much, you always want to definitely take a look at the running back. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a great call as well, and he'll save you a little bit over some of the other guys we talked about.
All right. Is there anybody else running back-wise you want to mention before we move to the receivers?
No, I think that's really it. I mean, like you said, some of the, we've gotten now 4 weeks to be able to look at who's really getting the work. The only other guy I had on my list is Martez Carter for the Los Angeles Wildcats.
I was going to mention him.
Yeah, and it's just because he had a really good week last week. He is limited in practice this week. He is questionable, but he's only 4,600, right? So I guess it was 2 weeks ago. He was out last week. If he does play, I don't know if he's going to step right back into that same role, but there's not a whole lot of value on this slate. So if he is ruled in and you're looking for somebody, I definitely think he could end up mixing it up a little in that LA backfield.
Yep. Yeah, I had him as one of my plays as well because he did have that monster game 2 weeks ago, then sat out, of course, last week. And I think that if he does come back and he's fully healthy, I think he goes right back into that role that he had the 2 weeks ago. So definitely love him as a value as well. All right, let's get into the receivers.
And now, wide receivers.
All right, once again, Nelson Bruce has already been ruled out for this game, so I know that there's some definitely some plays there with the LA team, with them filling in. So go ahead and give me some of your top guys, Tim.
Yeah, I think this week, like every week, you pretty much have to decide if you're going to pay up for Cam Phillips or not. After a couple weeks ago, teams realized that they are going to need to double team him. Last week, we saw Dallas make a concerted effort to keep him double teamed most of the game, and he ended up with 1 catch for 9 yards on 3 targets. And we saw it become the Nick Holley show. Yep. I don't know if we're going to see the Dragons, if they have the personnel, if they have the scheme to be able to do that. But I think that whenever you're paying $11,500 for a player, even with his talent, you really have to think, how does my lineup look kind of like I mentioned earlier with PJ Walker, right? So this week, I don't know if there's enough quote-unquote safe value to put both of those guys in your lineup and not just know that you're punting probably a couple spots, right? So I think you're either going to pay for Walker or for Cam Phillips this week. Right now, my lean is to go back and I put in my notes here, ride the Holly train. I think last week he played 100% of snaps. He was pretty much, his first look on almost every play, and I don't think that he's going to assume the double teams that Cam Phillips is getting. So, yes, obviously he can still have a great game. His price came up significantly. He's up to 7,100 now. But like I said, I want as much of his Houston offense as possible, and it looks like he's probably the easiest for me to fit in. But if you want to go Phillips and maybe pay down at quarterback, I completely understand. It's a very viable strategy. I'll probably have a couple of those lines myself. So like you said, Nelson Spruce has already been ruled out, so I'm probably going to go right back to Trey McBride. There was some, question of he was going to take over that role. Well, after we saw last week, there's no question he absolutely took over that role. 12 targets, 8 catches, 127 yards and a touchdown. I had Trey McBride last week in all of my lineups, and that absolutely worked out for me. Probably one of the main reasons that I cashed, considering that I actually also had a lot of Cam Phillips. So he saved me a little bit there. And then after that, it kind of gets a little dicey. The biggest thing, I guess, is going to be to figure out who Philip Nelson is going to target for the Renegades, right? Week 1, it was Donald Parham, but he's 9,500 now.
It's expensive.
Right? So you really got to wonder what kind of floor you need him to get at that price for a backup quarterback that we know, may lean on the run game, right? But I still think he's the safest option. So that's kind of where I'm leaning. I love, as I mentioned, Cameron Artis-Payne and Lance Dunbar, because I think that there may be a lot of checkdowns there. I think they're very viable. And then the only other guy I had listed in that respect is going to be Flynn Nagel. We saw him get a couple of big plays last week, but he had 33 yards on one play, and then the rest of the game he was like 5 for 40 or something like that.
Right.
So it's tough. Like I said, DraftKings has got really good about pricing these guys up, but we got to have some value somewhere. So
there's one more guy from that from the LA team that I wanted to mention too. Jordan Smallwood's been really good lately. He 3 out of his 4 games this year, he's got at least 6 targets. He's been kind of their underneath sort of possession guy. So he's definitely viable, especially with Nelson Spruce out once again. That'll definitely help his value tremendously. And then I thought I had one more guy. Of course, now I can't find him.
I'll tell you what. Oh, go ahead.
It's Nick Truesdale is going to be back as well, so that could affect Smallwood a little bit. I do like Truesdale as an option. He's pretty cheap at 4.7K, so he's definitely in the mix there. He played week 1 and week 2. He had 6 targets in week 1, 5 targets in week 2. So if he's back, I think that I kind of downgrade Smallwood a little bit, and Truesdale might be in my lineups.
No, Smallwood's on L.A. He's on Tampa Bay.
You're right. I was thinking. Sorry,
I agree with you. Truesdale was probably. I was going to say this here in a minute. It's probably my favorite value on the slate as of right now, because with DraftKings pricing algorithm, him being out for 2 weeks, they plummeted his price. Week 1, he was 6,900. Week 2, he was 6,700. This week, he's going to be 4,700.
Yep.
So there's not a whole lot of quote unquote safe value on this slate. But I think Nick Truesdale sticks out to me as probably one of the safer guys, and I'm not seeing a lot of talk about him. It may just be because he was just kind of ruled in, but he got a full practice in yesterday. It looks like he's ready to go. We saw Cornelius throw the ball around a little bit. I know people were worried, okay, well, Tampa Bay's a running team now. But at 4,700, I think you definitely have to look at him pretty seriously. He allows you to pay up for some of those other guys.
Yep.
So the only other guy I had on my list, and this is a guy I really liked week 1, and then just because of the awful quarterback play for the Guardians, I stopped playing him, and that's Mikael McKay.
Yep.
This guy is arguably one of the most talented wide receivers in the XFL. He's just stuck on a bad team, but with the emergence of, Perez in New York, we might actually see him get some looks this week.
Yep.
So I think that if you're looking for a guy that's probably going to be lower owned, he's 6,800. He'll obviously give you a little bit of lower salary on some of the guys we've talked about here. I think he's somebody with a lot of upside that's going to be really low owned.
Agreed.
So
Agreed.
He's more of a what we call a classic, GPP type play. I think it's gotten to the point now where I'm still not playing a lot of cash games. I'm playing mostly GPPs, but I really enjoy playing like the, 3, 5, 7, 10-man games.
Right.
And so he's somebody that if I had a lineup, let's say I had Nick Hawley in one lineup, I might switch him out for maybe Mikhail McKay and see if I could take down one of those league type games or maybe throw him in a couple GPPs. So.
Yep. I think McKay, he would have had a monster game. I don't know if you saw it or not, but he had that crucial drop. I mean, he was wide open. It would have been a touchdown. They would have gone up, and he dropped it. I mean, it was just a brutal drop. But I think that he would have had a monster game. And I went on and on about Truesdale, and I was mixing up Smallwood with this other guy I was going to mention, Jalen Tolliver, who's been good over the last couple of weeks because of Truesdale's absence. I do think that he takes a hit a little bit with Truesdale coming back. I was saying Smallwood, but I meant to say Tolliver. So, that's who I was thinking about there. He's at 5.7, so it might be a little bit too pricey with Truesdale coming back. Truesdale is definitely the option there.
I think Dan Williams has definitely kind of shown that he's the number one there in Tampa.
Agreed.
And it's just a question of whether or not it's going to be Tolliver or Truesdale as that number 2 guy now.
Yep.
That's really, I was going to say, speaking of guys who were very close to having a big week last week, was one Mr. Rashad Ross, man. That guy could have easily had 100-plus yards and 1 or 2 touchdowns, but Cardell just looked so bad.
Awful.
7 targets. 3 of them, I think, were short of him by 2 or 3 yards. A couple he threw over his head. So, there's going to be a Rashad Ross week. I don't know if it's going to be this week because St. Louis is actually a pretty good defense, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But one of these weeks, Rashad Ross is going to break out, and his price just keeps going down.
Yeah, I'm really curious because you mentioned Cardell and how bad he's looked. He's looked bad now for 2 weeks in a row. They may have one of the more exciting backup quarterbacks in the league if they were to go that route with Jackson, Tyree Jackson. He's kind of that sort of athlete quarterback. He played a little bit, I think, in Buffalo, for a while, if I'm not mistaken. But he's an athletic quarterback, and if they were to make that switch there, he would be someone to look at for sure. I don't think it'll be this week, but if Jones goes out and throws up another stinker, you might look for Tyrell Jackson to get a start here eventually.
Hey, while we're talking about athletic quarterbacks, one thing we didn't talk about when we were talking about the quarterback section is this news coming out of Tampa Bay that they're going to try and use Quentin Flowers as like an offensive weapon.
Right.
I don't remember what his name was, and I'm blanking on it. The guy out of Michigan that played in the league a couple years ago, who they brought in, and they're like, okay, we'll line up at running back, we'll line up at wide receiver, we'll just try and find a way to use this guy's athleticism. That's what Tampa Bay is trying to do with Quentin Flowers, and it's like, he's 6,800, which is the point where it's like, okay, I kind of want to wait and see. But if he's somebody that they're going to legitimately give a certain amount of, work to, I think a DraftKings is eventually going to have to give him some position flexibility.
Agreed. That's true. All right, we ready for the defenses?
Yeah.
Defense.
All right, man. What is your top defenses this week?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard not to go with the Roughnecks. They are the most expensive defense, but like I said, they're playing at home and they're projected to be like a 13-point favorite. And we showed last week that they actually were able to get some pressure on the quarterback. So it's tough to pay up for them, but I think if you can find a way, that's the way I would go. If you're looking to save a little money, though, Tampa Bay has been a surprisingly good defense this year. I think coming into the year, we were not expecting a whole lot out of that team. I usually don't like to play defenses on the road, but they're, I think, number 1 or number 2 in total yards given up at this point in the year. So, yes, they're currently giving up the least yards in the league, 237 yards per game, and they're actually getting some decent pressure on the quarterback as well. We saw them just absolutely make Cardell look terrible last week en route to a 16-point for defense, and they sell you about $1,200 over the Roughnecks.
Right.
So I think you could definitely play the Vipers. And then the third team, and this one is purely just projection, is the DC Defenders, right? They played 2 home games where they absolutely killed it, and they played 2 road games where they sucked.
Yep.
Right? Part of it was that they played arguably the two worst teams in the Guardians and the Dragons their first 2 weeks. So some of that may have just been a little bit of smoke and mirrors. But at 3,500, they give you some rare opportunity to pay down this week. And I think that they're probably the cheapest defense I actually think is viable, right? I have seen some people talking about the Guardians just because they're getting a backup quarterback. But as I mentioned earlier, they're giving up the most yards to pretty much every position. And I think Dallas is going to have a game plan to keep Walker out of trouble. So I think if you can't pay up, I'd like one of those cheaper guys.
Yeah, I was going to mention the Guardians because, fantasy defense and actual defense is always a different thing. And,
Right.
The Guardians' fantasy defense hasn't been terrible. They had, 8 points last week. I think they had a game where they had, I'm trying to pull up their game log now.
Yeah, 24 week one.
24 week one. They had a couple of bad weeks there in the middle, but they actually looked a lot better last week. They had 3 sacks and interception. Against that backup quarterback in Dallas. I wouldn't suggest using it in a cash game, and I wouldn't buy heavy into them. But their price makes it very interesting at 3,200. And if you need to pay down, I think Guardians are viable, but I wouldn't go all in on them for sure.
Yeah. The only thing I noticed is that they have the same thing as the Defenders, is that they're really good at home and not so great on the road.
Yep.
Again, some of that may just have been scheduled. I mean, with 4 weeks, you only have so much data to look at, and we're still learning a lot about some of these teams. But I agree with you. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they, I think that they're safe in the fact that they won't go negative on you, like we saw the Defenders do a couple weeks ago and just, kill a lot of our games.
Yep.
But yeah, I think that they're in play. I think Dallas is going to find a way to try and keep Nelson from, turning the ball over a lot or getting sacked a lot.
Yep,
I mentioned earlier in the show, I really like the Dallas running backs, both of them this week. I think that's going to be their game plan, and they're going to make New York, whoever is quarterbacking. I think it's going to be Perez. But either way, him and, McGloin, which, growing up, and I know you probably with me on this too, they always said if you have 2 quarterbacks, you don't have a quarterback,
yep.
right?
Yep.
Like you get one guy in there and he starts getting hot, and then you pull him out. That's one of the reasons, I give a lot of props to the Saints, because there would be times where Drew Brees would just be absolutely killing it, and then they pull him out, put in Taysom Hill, because they know he can just go right back in there, and he's Drew Brees, right? He'll
Yep.
be fine. But I just imagine if Perez starts getting a roll going, and they're like, all right, we're bringing in the Matt McGloin package, and then he throws a pick, and Perez is like, dude, what the fuck, right?
That's a good call.
All right, McGloin, just make it yourself comfortable over there on the bench, man, because he's thrown 3 ints and 1 touchdown this year,
Yeah.
right? And he fumbled the ball once, so just looking like a turnover machine. I just leave him on the bench, let him get nice and cozy, and see what Perez has got.
Agreed, 100%. All right, man, I'm trying to, while you were talking, I was scouring, looking for my sit call. I forgot to pick one before the show, so hopefully you have one. Let's go ahead and hit that.
And now, the sick call of the week.
Yeah, I think sit calls are getting tougher and tougher to go this week. But I am going to – this one is maybe the sickest sit call of the year. He very well could give you a 0, and that's going to be Freddie Martino for the Dallas Renegades. He is somebody who they's probably their 4th option at wide receiver right now, but he's somebody that it looked like last week once Philip Nelson got into the game, it may have just been a package-type situation, that he was actually looking at him as his second read. So if they go into the game saying, okay, we're going to take Parham out of this game and we're going to, slow down the running game, we're going to make Nelson have to throw 42 times like he did week 1, then I could see him getting 4 or 5, maybe 6 targets, and at min price $3K, if he gives you 9, 10 points, then he allows you to pay up for a lot of the, you could do Phillip Walker, Cam Phillips, and throw Martino in there and actually be able to put together a decent lineup. So it's kind of out there. Like I said, he very well could get you a 0 this week, but not much options down there cheap anymore. Like I said, my favorite cheap play this week is definitely Truesdale.
Yeah, so I did find my guy, and it's like yours. He can go out and give you a 0 for sure, but he did end up with a big game last week, mainly because of one play. He had that 42-yard touchdown. That's Saeed Blacknell for the LA Wildcats. He had that 42-yard touchdown there, and after that touchdown, he had a couple more targets, and he just couldn't pull them in. So if Josh Johnson's getting some confidence in him, maybe he gets a little bit more reps this week and can actually get some decent some fancy points for you. But he had a monster game last week because of that one touchdown, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that's how so many of these guys are. I mean, you have like 5 or 6 volume wide receivers, and then everybody else you're praying for a touchdown.
Yep.
You know, like even guys that would cost $7,000 on XFL, guys that would be in the 4K during NFL season, you're paying $7K just because you're thinking he might get an end zone target.
Yep.
He might get an end zone
Exactly.
target.
That's
So
all you
have
need.
the possibility of getting somebody who might get an end zone target at what, 3,600? Yeah, I agree with you. I think you got to take a look at him.
And there, just one last guy I wanted to mention because we didn't talk about him yet, and he's one of my favorite plays so far this year, and he hasn't let me down so far. And that's Pearson L. He's had really good games. He actually had a chance last week to run one in. He decided to throw it. It was an option play, and he had a wide open touchdown. He just ran it in, but he ended up throwing it instead, and it fell incomplete. But he's up there at 9,200 on the wide receivers there. I think that he's definitely in play for me as well. I just want to make sure I mentioned him because I played him, I think, every week this year so far.
Hey, I actually have one last guy. He's kind of too expensive to do as a sit call, but if you look at this guy's game log, you can see why it's a sit call, and that's Austin Prohl, right? So this guy had 26 points week 1, 1 point week 2, 20 points in week 3, 1 point week 4. I think there was a couple years ago in the NFL where like Cam Newton was like that. He would have a good week, bad week, good week, bad week. And this week he gets Houston where we know they're going to have to throw the ball, right? So he got 5 targets last week. So some of the volume is still there, but obviously you don't like 1 catch for 1 yard, right? And then he fumbled it, right? So it's just not good. But if there's somebody I think is going to come in at kind of like Mikhail McKay, going to come in with way too low ownership for their not volume, for their role in their offense, it's going to be him. I expect, that Seattle's going to have to throw the ball a ton. He probably is going to see another 7-ish target week. And so, yeah, it wouldn't shock me at all if he had another 20-point week. And nobody, I think, is going to own him.
Right, exactly. All right, let's close it out on our stacks.
And now, the stacks of the week.
All right, Sim, who do you got for your stack this week?
Yeah, I think I talked about him all show, so it shouldn't be a shocker. I'm going to go again with the Dallas Renegades. Part of that is just because Philip Nelson is so cheap and he's getting a start at home. So it's going to be Philip Nelson. I'm going to go ahead and trust my gut going with Cameron Artis-Payne. And then on the other side, I think I'm going to go ahead and combine that with Flynn Nagel. And then since he's a little bit cheaper than Parham, and then if I'm going to run it back with anybody from New York, it's going to be my boy Mikhail McKay.
All right, good stuff. I like that. I like that stack a lot. All right, so my stack is a little bit more expensive, but I do think that there's some big playability here. My quarterback's going to be Tamu, and then the receiver is going to be the guy I just mentioned, Pearson L. And then I'm going to run it back, and I'm going to take one more shot with this guy. He's kind of let me down all year, but I'm going to run it back with Rashard Ross for the DC Defenders and hope that he can do something finally, catch one of those long bombs. That's all I need, just catch one long bomb. But I think he's as cheap as he's been all year, and I think he gives you a little bit of flexibility because, like I said, the expensive quarterbacks, Tamu's pretty expensive, and then your receiver, Pearson L's up there. I think he's like 9,200, something like that. So those are the guys that I would stack there. Just hope for that, those couple of big plays there, a couple of big play receivers and a quarterback that can run the ball. So that's my stack for the week.
Yeah, and then one last one. We mentioned it earlier in the show. If you want to do one of the famous running back defense stacks, I think the best way to go this week is going to be Butler and the Roughnecks. Good stuff.
Just real quick, because the people were asking about it on Facebook, and I wanted to mention this before we leave. Yes, we are having our regular show tomorrow, Friday nights. It will not be the DFS show that we normally do on Friday night. I'm actually going to have Ryan McDowell. If you know who that is, he kind of runs DLF football, Dynasty League football. He's coming on. He's one of our biggest guests that we've ever had on the show. So he'll be on tomorrow. We're doing a little bit of question and answers, and he actually went to the Combine. He was there for the Combine, so we're going to obviously ask him about that as well. So to answer your question, Kyle, yes, there will be a regular show tomorrow at 9:30, but it'll be the Dynasty show tomorrow, so definitely tune in for that.
Yeah, and also, Kyle, thank you. It was Denard Robinson I was thinking of. His name escaped me, but as soon as you said, I was like, yep, that's him.
Yep. Good stuff. Good stuff. All right. I think that's a wrap, right, Tim? You got anything else you want to mention before we get out of here?
Yeah, just obviously, since this is a Thursday show, like you said, keep an eye on injuries. If you have any questions, you can always get us on Facebook or on Twitter. My Twitter account, again, Keto DFS. Hit me there.
All right. Good stuff. For Tim, I'm Jeff. That's a wrap.